Thanks to our docker compose.yaml file and the docker compose up command, we started a MySQL container in Docker. You can prove it by running docker compose ps. Yep, port 3306 of the container is being exposed to my host machine on port 32776, which is a random port that will change each time we run docker compose up. Whether you followed me through the Docker setup or decided to install MySQL on your own, we're now at the same point. We need to update the database_URL environment variable to point to the database. Normally, I would copy database URL, go into .env.local, paste, and update it to whatever my local settings are, like root user, no password, and a creative database name. But I'm not going to do that. Why? Because the database URL environment variable is already configured correctly. Let me show you. When we started our app, we used the Symfony binary to create a local web server. I'll run Symfony server:stop to stop it, just so I can show you the command we used. It was Symfony serve-d. That started a web server at localhost:8000. So what we're seeing in the browser is being served by the Symfony binary. Well, surprise! The Symfony binary has special integration with Docker. It detects that we have a docker compose.yaml file in this project, loops over all of the running services, reads their config, and exposes real environment variables to our app with the connection details for each one. For example, because this service is called database, we technically could have called it anything, the Symfony binary is already exposing an environment variable called database_URL, the exact environment variable that Doctrine is looking for. I'll show you exactly what I mean. First, go back to your browser, watch the bottom right of the web debug toolbar, and refresh. The little server icon turned green. This is info about the Symfony web server, and now it says envars from Docker. Back at your editor, open up public/index.php, the front controller for our project. We normally don't need to mess with this file, but let's temporarily hack in some code. After the autoload line, add $$server. The server global variable holds a lot of things, including any real environment variables that are passed to PHP. Back at the browser, refresh and search for database. Check it out! A database_URL environment variable. That is being set by the Symfony binary, which is reading the info dynamically from Docker. It has all the correct info, including port 32776. When a real environment variable exists, it overrides the value that you have in .env or .env.local. In other words, as soon as we run docker compose up, our app has access to a database_URL environment variable that points to the Docker container. We don't need to configure anything. Back in index.php, remove the DD line. Another way to see what environment variables the Symfony binary is exporting to our app is by running Symfony var:export --multiline. And yes, this has database URL and some other database variables that you can use for each part if you need to. If we added a second service to Docker Compose, like a Redis container, then that would show up here too. The big picture is this. All we need to do is run docker compose up-d, and our Symfony app is immediately set up to talk to the database. I love that. But we can't really do anything yet because the MySQL instance is empty. Next, let's create our database and make sure that Doctrine knows exactly which version of MySQL we're using.